What do dioramas, lighthouses, and dice towers have in common? This episode is the answer. Episode 2. Welcome to episode 2 of JunkDrawer Studios. I don't know how many episodes I'm going to have to film before I feel normal filming these intros, so I'm just going to brute force through this. If you didn't watch the first video, welcome to JunkDrawer Studios. My name is Betsy, and I like to make all sorts of things like dioramas and scatter terrain for D&D, wargaming, things like that. As the title of this video in my very cool and not cringy at all cold open indicated, today we're making this lighthouse diorama, which also doubles as a dice tower. I'll show you how that works at the end. So why a dice tower lighthouse diorama? I don't know, part of me was just like, surely I can't fit another diorama somewhere, but a dice tower, that can live in my board game shelf. I'm sure I will make just dioramas at some point on this channel. But for now, I just wanted to challenge myself and see if I could make something that looked cool on a shelf that also served a little bit of a purpose. Quick aside, I did tease a big reveal trailer of my large zombicide project that I've been working on. Unfortunately, I just wasn't quite ready to put that out yet for my second video. I wanted to get a couple normal videos under my belt, I decided, and also I'm just not done with the project yet, like I thought I would be. Yeah, I'm sorry, it will come out soon. Without further ado, let's just jump right into the lighthouse. All right, jumping into the concept sketch. I love this part. I love brainstorming. I love trying to think of all the little details that I want to add to this build. I don't stick to this super closely, but it's really just like a visual list of all the things I want to add. Like I'm going to have a dock. I'm going to have little buoys hanging on the side. The back of the lighthouse is going to have some rocks, and here's like a rough plan of color. Here's some more details I want to add, like some little flags and some barrels. This is really just so I don't forget all of these brainstorming things. It's less about sticking to this exactly. And there it is. Like I said, I don't stick to this exactly in the end, but it's still super helpful to do this phase for me. So to start the build, I took out all the random cylindrical things that I've acquired and saved for these types of projects. I ended up going with this. I believe it was like a packaging for some paintbrushes that I bought a long time ago, or pencils or something like that. I thought it was a good size and a good shape for a lighthouse. This next part is kind of hard to explain because I tend to build as if I'm sketching. I really don't enjoy measuring out and planning it meticulously beforehand. I kind of just like figuring out the build as I go. I'm really just kind of going with the flow, mapping it out as I go, holding things up together, seeing how things line up. This is especially true for this part right here where I'm trying to figure out how the actual dice tower part works. Spoiler alert, I need to refine how to build a dice tower if I ever do this again, because as you'll see shortly, it doesn't work perfectly. Next, I started gluing the building to the tube of the lighthouse. You can see I glued it like halfway up because I had planned on having a dock supporting the building. Here I'm just cutting a bunch of pieces of very thin cardboard to add sort of like a wood paneling shiplap kind of look to this building. I find it's these small little details that really set builds apart. This is where you get all the little texture and especially when you get to the painting phase, this really sets things apart and makes them look a little bit more polished, a little bit more detailed, a little bit more realistic. I kind of ramshackled this roof together with some chipboard because I knew I was going to cover it up later, which you'll see shortly. The goal with this is really just to get a basic structure to build on top of. Here's the moment I realized I got a little too ambitious with the internal structure and it needed some refinement in order to work. I do try to fix it with some Sculptamold though. Sculptamold is a modeling compound made of plaster and some paper material. You just mix it with water and it makes a really durable texture once it dries. I was having so much trouble filming this and smoothing this out, so I did end up cutting the top off of the lighthouse, but I glued it back together later. Once I got the Sculptamold in a place where I was happy with it, I felt like it hopefully fixed the banking issue I was having to let the dice slide out a little bit easier. I went ahead and glued some corrugated cardboard onto the roof in this sort of haphazard way to make it look like metal panels. And I like how it looks. I think it looks really good once it's painted up. Next, I took some 1/2-inch thick XPS insulation foam, which you can get at Home Depot or any construction or hardware store. I decided to make a stone base for the building and have the dock extended out from that, rather than the dock supporting the building as well, which was in my original concept sketch. I just took some wood glue and a little bit of hot glue to secure it quickly. I like this combo of a more fast drying glue like hot glue and a more secure glue like wood glue. You kind of get the best of both worlds. I just glued this up in little chunks to emulate stone. I add a ton more detail to this later, but as a first pass, I think this already kind of looks like stone and I'm really happy with it. I then took some thicker XPS foam to make some bigger organic rocks jutting out of the back of the lighthouse, as if this was built on this big rock cropping. Perhaps the stones that are supporting the building are actually carved out of this very same rock. I just took a cheap snap blade and carved rock texture right into the foam. Once I'm happy with the layout, I glued them all up, and then I began adding some even smaller details with the same XPS foam. Here you can see I'm just sort of sizing things up. I'm, going rogue a little bit. I'm not really planning anything out. That seems to be my MO for this build so far, and I'm happy with the results, so I think the approach works. You can see there are some gaps here, but I decided to fill it up with some more Sculptamold, which helps so much create a more natural looking rock. I think if I was going for something a little bit cartoony, the chunks that I carved would have been enough, but I really want this to look real. I really want this to look realistic. So I just smudged some Sculptamold in there and took a few carving tools and just blended everything together, making it look rocky. Now for adding the detail to the stonework. This part is so fun because everything really starts to come to life. I first took a pencil and then I took a knife and some various other carving tools and just defined the big bricks in this XPS foam. I even went as far as to add some damage and rounded the corners. I'll be honest, I'm being pretty rough with this. It's kind of flaking off everywhere, but I'm gonna seal it up later with some Mod Podge. And I feel like these little details are really what makes dioramas pop. I'm obsessed with all the little cracks and the little inconsistencies in the rock. Speaking of detail, I then took a knife and added even more chips and beveled edges to these stones. Really just wanted to give this a story, like these were hand carved by some fishermen. I then took a trusty ball of tinfoil to add a final level of detail. A lot of people do this. You can also use real rocks to achieve this same effect. At this point, I had the idea of adding barnacles to the side. They're a little big for the scale of this, and the clay was really old, so it did end up cracking, but if you can't tell by now, I'm actually a pretty optimistic person, and I kind of just like rolling with happy accidents, so I don't mind that they're cracking. It adds to the texture, and I think it ended up looking really good. I did look up reference for these. Essentially, it's just balls of clay, and then I made a little indent in the middle with a little ball carving tool. I added a few more final strips of cardboard just as like trim and baseboards. This adds more texture, more detail, more realism, and also can help cover up spots that you're not super happy with. Finally, time for the dock. I took some wood and this angle miter shear. I highly recommend this. As I'm demonstrating here, it can cut things at all these different degrees. I just cut things straight, but man, this purchase was so worth it. It just shreds through popsicle sticks. I've tried all sorts of knives and cutters and saws, but nothing works as well as this, especially if you need to cut things at like a 45-degree angle consistently. Anyway, back to the dock. I just built this with some glue, some popsicle sticks, and some thinner coffee stirrers. At this point, I wish I had some more specific instructions, but I truly just winged this. I'm not sure how structurally secure this dock is, but I added all sorts of little bits and bobs to hopefully add to some support, like these tiny little wooden details that I'm adding here. I think it looks great, but also I just kept adding things until this felt solid. I wanted to add an additional little house room thing at the top, so I cut off part of the roof so that this would fit snugly. And I just glued in this little foam board room that I created. I do end up covering this up with some panels later, so that's why I'm not worried about how it looks. Now I'm working on the top of the lighthouse. I took some chipboard and this old goat cheese lid, sanded it up so that the glue would stick better, and glued this random orange thing that I found at a Savers, which is like a charity shop or a thrift store. I have no idea what this is. It wasn't a toy, despite it looking like a toy. It was some gardening thing. And I thought it made the absolute perfect top for a lighthouse. So I'm just gluing it up. I'm also cutting with a little miter box and hobby saw a piece of tinfoil tube, which is very, very thick and sturdy cardboard, just to extend the top of the lighthouse thing a little bit. Here I'm adding little foam board pieces to keep the top secure. It does need to come on and off because that's where you will put the dice in. And now I'm just gluing everything up. I glued the top of the lighthouse back on. I glued the roof back on. And so far, I gotta say, I'm really stoked with how this is coming out. And yes, I know I say that a lot. I'll work on some other catchphrases. Now I'm just adding some paneling to the side of this little tiny room, cutting it out of some chipboard and gluing it up. I know this shot is very beautiful. I don't really know why I decided to do top down for this. But yeah, isn't that orange piece just perfect for a lighthouse? Here I just glued up another piece of chipboard for the roof and a little piece of corrugated cardboard for the metal sheeting on the roof. Next, I'm gathering some supplies to add even more detail. I've got some foam, some cross-stitching grating, these little wooden caps, some rope. I didn't use everything here, but I just wanted to have some options. Adding little caps to the seams on the roof with this EVA foam. This will all be painted, so I'm not worried about it being bright blue. I also added some paneling to the side of the main entrance where the dice will come out of. To be honest, I'm not super happy with how this came out. I should have come up with something a little bit more interesting for the bottom there, but once it's painted, it does look a lot better. And yeah, I'm just adding a little bit more foam to cover up some mistake spots. I'm thinking this will just kind of look like an old lighthouse that someone had to repair haphazardly over the years. I'm adding some inside trim to the windows to clean up that foam board edge, a little bit of extra detail around the windows. This little window was the death of me. But yeah, I'm just trying to add more detail. I also wanted to cover up the hack job that I did when I cut the top of that lighthouse off. Here I'm gluing some of this cross-stitching mesh, I forget what this is called, to some pieces of chipboard to add to the windows, as well as some straws and some wooden bits that I made little chimneys out of. Oh, now I'm adding tiny little beads all over the build to act as rivets. I'm just using a little super glue. These are glass beads, I believe. You can find them at any craft store. I love adding rivets. It's really fiddly and they're kind of annoying to paint if they need to be a different color than what they're mounted on. But man, do they add detail and texture and look awesome. I made a quick little roof out of EVA foam for the top of the lighthouse. More rivets, because why not? And glued it together. This next part I would not recommend. I'm relying a lot on super glue here as the only little tiny connection point of these wooden sticks. I was trying to make like a railing for the top of the lighthouse. I kind of phoned in the top part here. I think it looks great in the end, but I probably could have done a little bit more sophisticated construction. This was a real pain and is probably not the most secure, but I'm really happy with it overall. And that's the build portion done. Next up is paint, and gosh, I love priming with Mod Podge and black paint. It seals everything up and it really brings everything together. Now this doesn't look like a mess of cardboard and construction material and random household trash. It really starts to look like what it's supposed to be, which in this case is a lighthouse. The Mod Podge also helps seal everything up and adds a little bit of extra durability. Next, I just start laying down some color. I'm using a few different grays for the rock and the stone. This is just to add a little bit of natural variation. You could throw a little green or red in there too if you want. I just stuck with some grays to keep it simple. and I'm just brushing it heavily over. This is why we use black as the primer, because if you don't cover everything, it just looks like a deeply recessed shadow, which is really helpful. I've made a few builds in the past where I started with white primer, and let's just say I do not ever want to do that again. There probably is a time and a place for white primer, but I would say stick with black if you're just starting out. So yeah, as you can see, I'm adding some brown and white to different parts of the build. I just kind of wanted some natural colors. I tend to go really bright usually. I do end up adding a lot more color to this towards the end of the video. But I start off with pretty neutral colors, and I'm happy with how they look. Now I'm dry brushing the rocks with a lighter gray. I talked about this a little bit in my first video, but gosh, dry brushing brings out so many details. You can see here comparison between the flat gray and the first dry brush pass. It just looks so much better with the dry brush. So yeah, I did it with progressively lighter colors, and the results really speak for themselves in my opinion. Loving how this is looking. I then took a few different colors of paint and painted the roof, which is something that I failed to film, but you can imagine how painting on the roof looked. I was going for like a deep brass kind of a look here. I painted the White House top white and the bottom red. I also forgot to film the red part, but again, you know what paint going on material looks like. I painted some of the trim with a slightly different brown. Really just trying to go for realism here, like I said earlier. Put a little bit of white on the barnacles to help them stand out against the stone. And finally, I did a second coat of paint on the places where I felt like it needed it. I did throw some more red on the roof. It's a little lighter shade than what's on the base of the lighthouse, but I just wanted, more of a pop of color up at the top. The railing also got a light beige color. It looks fine. Next, I made a wash out of a bunch of different colors, some brown, some blue, and some green. I wanted to give sort of a mildewy wooden look to the dock. And I do think I achieved that, maybe a little too well, because as you'll see in a second, it's pretty thick, it's pretty gross looking. But I managed to knock it back later, which you'll see. I also added the wash to these cute little barrels that I bought at a craft store. I switched gears here and busted out some Sculpey, which is a polymer oven-baked clay, and decided I wanted to make the buoys. These would be hanging on the side of the building, and I was really excited to make these because this is where I would get to add a big pop of color. So I sculpted each little buoy, I added a little stick to some of them. I baked them in the oven, but I didn't show that here. I painted them white, and then I just went to town adding little stripes of color. I looked up tons of reference, but I also just kind of winged it, as I've already said is kind of my vibe. And yeah, they're going to be so small that I wasn't super worried about them being perfect. I covered them in some gloss Mod Podge, and I feel like they came out so cute. Moving back to the dock, you can kind of see what I mean about this dry brushing. This is how it looks dry brushed, and this was how it looked when it dried. It looks so much better with this dry brush of a beige. It just kind of knocks back that gross look and makes it look a little bit more worn out and like sun-beaten, which I love the look of. It kind of started off as just a Band-Aid quick fix, but I think I might actually use this technique going forward. Next, I took some bronze paint and painted all the rivets, and oof, I'm loving how this dock turned out. I added that same bronze to those barrels I mentioned. This looked like it would be fiddly, but it actually was really easy to paint these. I then took this little wooden spool thing and decided to make a barrel to go on the dock. Next, I took some water effects from Vallejo and just added it to the top of the barrels so it looked like they had water in them. Now that the barrel base coat was dry, I took a bunch of metal and rusty color and just went to town. If you watched my first video, first of all, thank you so much. And also, doubly thank you to all the people who complimented my rust. I really like doing rust, I guess. It just always comes out really satisfying to me. So I needed to make sure I had one little rusty piece in this diorama as well. Next, I took some technical paint from Citadel. I didn't end up using the Vallejo one, to add a little patina to the bronze roof. I went a little heavy-handed with it, but once I do a wash at the end, it fits in a lot better than it appears here. And I just think it looks cool. Speaking of the wash, here I am applying it. This is just one I made with some black acrylic ink and water. They're really cheap to make. And if you don't know, a wash is just a thin layer of ink or paint to seep into the crevices and add some detail. I liked how it looked on some of the darker colors. The stone, the red, this brown part, the roof. Once I get to the white, as you'll see, both the white building and the top of the lighthouse, I wasn't as in love with it. I tried to blot a lot of it away with a paper towel, but I think I probably could have used a warmer toned wash or something. It just ended up looking really dirty, especially on the top of the lighthouse. Everywhere else it looks great, but yeah, it's looking pretty gross. So what I ended up doing was painting over it, which you can see the results of here. I painted over the white, leaving just a little bit of the wash at the edges. I also added this cool red stripe. There was already a natural stripe on the container that came through the paint, so I figured why not? I already had a built-in guideline. You can see here I'm just kind of adding a pop of color to a few more places after the wash knocked back so much of the color. So I added some more red to the roof. I painted a little blue stripe on the bottom of the building, which I love. I was so on the fence about this, but man, I'm really happy with how this came out. I painted it splotchily on purpose so it would look kind of worn out and like it's been sitting out on this dock for a really long time. I wanted to weather up the stripe as well, but I went way too far. So you can see me sponging on some white and then basically bringing all of the red back until I was happy with the result. Finally, again, in the interest of adding more color, I went in with a gold on the bronze roof and just did a little dry brush over the ridges so it would look a little bit more interesting and a little bit more different from the brown on the building. I added some of that to the roof as well for the same reason. And I went in with a green shade to add some algae kind of look to the bottom of the stone. This is something you can definitely do in the original painting phase or the dry brushing phase, but I really like these Citadel washes for this kind of purpose. It also dried looking a little wet too, which I think was cool. I also added it to the dock and to the bottom of the barrels. And for the final details, I glued the dock together with some PVA glue into the EVA foam of the stone. I took out my buoys, which I glued some little string onto and added little knots on the end. I super glued them to the building. You know, this isn't the most secure, but this isn't a wargaming piece. It's just a diorama, so I think it should be fine. I super glued a bunch of them to the front of this little building, some on the side, and some to the dock. And I really think that pop of color adds so much. I then took some milliput that's really old and gross looking, but I think it works fine once I kneaded it together. Milliput is like a epoxy clay, basically. It cures really, really strong. And I made a little lifesaver out of it. Then started working on the flags. This is one of my favorite techniques I've picked up over the years. Just take some paper towel and some water and some glue. You just cut the paper towel into the shape you're looking for. I would recommend using a sturdy paper towel. I like the brand Viva. You dip it into the mixture of the glue and water, and you wrap it around a stick if you're making a flag, or you can drape it over something if you want it to look like cloth. Here I'm kind of positioning it to be a little wavy and looking like it's sort of falling down at an angle, and then it will dry that way. Once it dries, they're super hard and durable, as you can see here. And gosh, it's so easy and so satisfying to do this. I highly recommend. You can do this with fabric as well, but I actually really like using paper towel. I then just painted them up. I did some white, some black, some various colors. In a few, you'll see me adding a few details to some of them, like this one's a multicolor flag. I added a wash to some of them. The wash was way too dark, but I ended up wiping away a lot of it. I also did a wash on the sticks so that they would look more weather beaten. I had so much fun with this. I've used it before for like awnings on buildings too. Works great. This one has a very poorly painted Jolly Roger symbol. Added some stripes to the lifesaver. And then took my little vise pin and drilled into the side of the building and glued them in place. It's a little chaotic, but I like the pops of color. Finally, moving on to basing and adding grass and flowers, which is truly one of my favorite parts. I took a bunch of little tufts and flock and this lichen moss stuff, some flowers. I then took some glue, water, and a bunch of the turf and tried to mix it into a bit of a paste. This was me wanting to add some sort of algae and growth to the rocks. Once I mixed it up, it's very wet and you can just paste it on with a popsicle stick or your fingers, whatever you want to work with. And I just smear it over everywhere where I feel like there would be some growth. It also dries really hard and durable because you've added all of that glue. I kind of went a little crazy with it because I have so much fun doing this part. I then took little bits of this moss and lichen, and using some PVA glue, I just glued it in a few spaces where I felt like it needed more of a moss looking stuff. It's not super different than the paste I made, but it adds a little nice variety. I finally glued some flowers in a couple places sticking out of the cracks in the stone, some flowers and some tufts of grass. Most of these come with a little bit of adhesive on the back, like a little sticker basically, but I don't find that they're very strong, so I like to use a little PVA glue to really secure them in. It's always during these final steps that I'm like, what else can I add? But I think I'm done. So that was the process of making the Lighthouse dice tower. But before I reveal the whole thing, I just wanted to show you the dice tower in action. So here's the lighthouse. Top comes off. Take your D20 or whatever dice you want to roll, and then you pop it in the top. And it spills out on the dock. So yeah, I might revisit making a dice tower in a future video. If you enjoyed this and would like to see me try again, maybe a little bit simpler. This was a little bit ambitious for my first try. Let me know. I'd be happy to tackle it again. In fact, I almost certainly will try again. But for now, it definitely works for a standard D20 90% of the time. And I'm really happy with it, and it's going to look really good on my shelf. Real quick, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who watched and viewed and shared and liked my first video. I don't know what to expect moving forward with this channel, but I'm really hopeful that I can reach some more folks. And so far, I've been thrilled with the amount of support that I've gotten. Thank you to all the people who shared it and watched it. Thanks to all the people who found this video and like what I'm putting out. I hope you stick around. And huge thanks to my husband, Richard, who supported me like crazy through this process and continues to do so. And yeah, lastly, if there's anything you'd like to see me do, I'm willing to try or share or demonstrate. I'm just really passionate about this, and I hope that people are enjoying the videos that I put out. And now, here's the reveal.